Welcome back to the Mina Kimes show featuring Lenny, Divisional Round Recap Edition. I am once again, as always, joined on here on Tuesdays by the great Domonique Foxworth.
Oh, you're in a good mood today. I'm normally not the great Domonique Foxworth. I'm just Domonique.
I call everybody the great.
Not me.
So
So you even devalued it. You might say that call everybody the great.
You are great. Domonique is the host of the Domonique Foxworth show, featuring nobody, Charlie Kravitz, but he doesn't get a credit like Lenny.
Hell no.
And I am excited to talk about these games. We're going to pick winners and woofs from each of the divisional games. Of course, later in the week, I'm going to preview both championship games. But before we do that, I did want to bring up some news. We got these coaching hires starting to trickle in. Bunch of coordinator hires, but the big one is, of course, Ben Johnson becoming the head coach of the Bears. I did a YouTube video. You guys check that out, I guess, if you haven't already, where I ranked all the head coaching jobs. And Domonique, I ranked the Bears job as actually the most attractive. And apparently Ben Johnson felt that way. You and I have talked a lot about coaching hires generally, and I have expressed to you that I really try not to have strong opinions about it because I just feel like it's such a crapshoot. But obviously for Bears fans, this has to be pretty exciting after watching that offense over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, and he's been like the hot candidate. And we fall into these kind of traps as a football public, I think, of chasing the hot coordinator. And you and I, for I don't know how long we've known each other, but since the beginning of us having these conversations, have talked about the idea that at least I think it's a mistake generally to hire based on how good a coordinator was as coordinating an offense, because it's a very different job. And I think it's a double kind of mistake when you're hiring someone in order to like fix your quarterback. I don't know. I get the argument for it, and this is why you don't have these strong opinions, because I actually don't know whether Ben Johnson has the skills to be a great head coach or not. But I'm assuming that they're hiring him because they want him to fix the quarterback. And I think the head coaching job is so all-consuming that either you're going to be an active head coach or you're going to fix the quarterback. I don't think you can do both.
Yeah, I mean that was the case for Dave Canales in Carolina, right? People said, well, look how good Geno was in Seattle with his tutelage ostensibly and Baker, and it does seem to actually have happened a bit in Carolina. I guess the one thing I will say about Ben Johnson is this. If you hit on the brilliant offensive head coach, it's incredible because you're not losing your play caller, which tends to happen in the NFL. It's literally what's happened in Detroit, right? If you have the hot young play caller and he's really good, he's gone. And if you hit on it like a Sean McVay or a Kevin O'Connell, and obviously there's some shared coaching lineage there, it can be excellent. The thing I would point to with McVay and O'Connell, who are sort of the two examples of great success that come to mind, is one, both proved also to be excellent leaders and people managers. No idea about Ben. I'm not going to even say, And then the other thing they both did early on was hit on their defensive coordinators. Right. Sean McVay, we've talked about this, brought on Wade Phillips and just said, run the defense, man, at first. Mm-hmm. And then Kevin O'Connell obviously was made, Brian Flores is his defensive coordinator and is incredibly, incredibly good. So I think the rumor that Ben Johnson might be bringing in Dennis Allen, a report, not a rumor, that to me is maybe the most encouraging part of all of this, not to big brain it and say, because Ben Johnson's offense is what's exciting, but that to me is exactly what you want, especially looking at those other two examples.
No, that's incredibly encouraging. And you're right. If that works out, that'll be awesome. But you still have to be a head coach, and he's still going to have to, I think you have to hit on the quarterback coach also. And I guess he might bring Mark Brunell with him, which he was the guy in Detroit. So I think that matters too. And I guess so. The examples that you pointed out that worked are fair, but those weren't guys who were brought in. I guess McVay's the one example where it's like, we have this quarterback who's already here, come fix him.
Yeah.
Canales, if we're going to consider that a success, is another example. I don't think we have a bunch more examples. We have a lot of times where people tried, and maybe it was the quarterback's fault, or maybe it was somebody else's fault,
Right.
but it just hasn't happened or hasn't worked out. And I'm sorry. The last thing is I push back a little bit on the losing the offensive coordinator or the offensive mind thing. It's like I get that, but all the great quarterbacks, like they've gone through a couple coordinators. Is I guess you would
With the
say
great
that.
quarterbacks, the great ones.
Right. But I guess
Yeah.
that's what you're. I don't know if you're not having a very successful offense, then your coordinator's not going to leave. Like if you do have a successful offense, your coordinator is going to leave. Like Ben Johnson, Jared Goff is not great. Ben Johnson has coordinated a good offense for 2 years. He's gone. So like
Right.
and all the quarterbacks continue to play well under their next play callers, like Josh Allen. And I guess maybe that's your point. It's like these guys are just great. They play
Great
well.
quarterbacks, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess my point is that a great offensive coordinator gives you a little bit of leeway with the
Mhm.
quarterback position, and so, when you lose him, if you haven't if hit on the quarterback, it hurts, and we're gonna see that with Detroit, I think not necessarily I'm saying Jared Goff's gonna
Right.
play worse,
Right.
my point is rather that's gonna be put to the test a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the Bucks are a kind of it's going to the Canales leaving the Bucks,
Hmm.
and they did something that is near impossible, which is they actually improved in
Right.
play calling. But that doesn't happen very often, Dominique.
I mean,
That's hard.
no,
It
I get
really
it.
is
I
hard.
guess the argument for why you have to hire this offensive mind is
I'm
just
saying
to
you have
me.
to.
No, I know, I got you. I didn't mean that I'm arguing. I'm disagreeing with you. Generally, just the argument for protecting against losing your offensive mind is like a second degree problem that we'll deal with it when we get to it. Is like I still think you should not be concerned about that. You should be
No.
about concerned about having the head coach, and
My
I
point
guess
was though
it's an added bonus, right?
when you hit on it, it's amazing,
Yeah.
right? Like when you got Andy Reid forever and he's your head coach and he's a brilliant offensive mind, you just don't have to worry about, the Chiefs can lose their coordinators and it's not a big deal. Of course,
Which
they
then they
also
got
have
Spags too, yeah,
that. Well, that's
yeah,
the secret
which is
sauce there. We'll get to that, obviously. But yeah, it's I guess my point is just like
yeah,
when you hit on it, and if he turns out to be all the other things that Sean
yeah,
McVay and Kim
it's
O'Connell were,
perfect,
it's amazing. But it
right.
doesn't always happen. It certainly doesn't always happen. A couple other quick hires: Lou Anarumo going to the Indianapolis Colts.
Ooh,
That's just fascinating to me, Dominique, because it's such a philosophical change, right? This is a
right,
Colts defense that has just been very under Gus Bradley, very cover three, zone centric,
mhm,
pretty traditional in a lot of ways. And you bring in Lou Anarumo, who's calls a much more complicated defense. So I'm intrigued by that, honestly. I think it's an interesting hire. We don't have to get into it in too much detail, but
yeah.
and then there's a lot of reports floating around that I'll hit later. Is it anything that jumped out to you or?
Yeah, no, I think the Lou hire is interesting. Just some personnel is going to have to change. It's a overhaul. Like they don't have the
Yeah.
personnel to execute the defense that he wants to execute. So that's always an interesting shift, which means that it might be slow coming for that defense to get around to being better than it was last year. And it's also interesting that you hired a guy who got fired off of a bad defense, and which you could
Yeah,
argue is personnel, but it just rarely does that.
that's a good
Is
point.
that the trajectory?
We'll see. All right. So let's just get to the winners now, or the games rather. And we're going to work backwards in time. Let's start with Ravens Bills. So I'm taking the AFC winners and then the
Mhm.
NFC losers, and you're going to take the woofs. Pardon me, the reverse. So I'll go first with the Bills. Um, I just wrote physicality.
Yeah.
I mean, James Cook, not the sexiest stat line. It's not like
Mhm.
Saquon. There was no, 50-yard plus runs or anything like that, but it was just brutally efficient. And it was brutally efficient against one of the best run defenses in the NFL. And I think that because that was the strength on strength matchup in this one.
Mhm.
And the Bills, I thought, came out on top. I mean, the Ravens had their worst success rate on the ground in the run, second worst, pardon me, of the entire season. And just watching back some of their runs, because it was just a lot of like 8, 9, 7, 8 yard runs, right? Um, Similar to how it's been all year, just offensive line was just displacing humans.
Right.
Like it was just very, very similar to their offensive identity the entire season. And while the Ravens' run game eventually got going, Dominique, in the first half, when they struggled in comparison, aside from Lamar Jackson's turnovers, and we'll talk about the Ravens on
Yeah.
your side. My takeaway was like, oh, the Bills just look like the more physical team.
Yeah, it was the most surprising thing of the weekend. In a weekend when Jayden Daniels got a win, I was more surprised by the Bills' ability to run the ball kind of at will. And it was one of those situations where I kept waiting for them to like ask Josh to do something special, but there was no reason to. And that's like a lot of discipline and play calling and confidence in your offensive line, because there were a lot of times where I'm like, all right, they got him now. Here comes the play action. Nope. We're just gonna hand it off again and run it again and just keep going. And it's it's a very mature way to call a game, especially when you do have Josh Allen there,
Yeah.
because I think I would have gotten a little antsy. And I think most offensive coaches get a little antsy. I mean, antsy is the wrong word because that implies like some nervousness, but just gets excited. It's like, all right, we got him. We got him set up. And they never really went for that knockout punch, which maybe we would have been critical if Mark Andrews catches that ball, but like it worked out.
Yeah. There was a moment in this game where Allen was like stuffed at the goal line on the keeper, right? And I was watching that and you could see him
Oh yeah.
briefly think
Oh
about doing
yeah.
something and then he didn't. And he just goes to, and I was thinking, man, like this really is Josh Allen really is so different now as a
Yeah.
quarterback from a few years ago. It was a very mature performance. Obviously, the contrast and then him not turning over is a large part of why the Ravens lost and the Bills won this game. But as far as like this Bills team, I guess in some ways the defensive performance in the second half was more like impressive in terms of like how different it was the first time these teams played, and then the dam broke and the Ravens started moving the ball on them on offense in the second half at quite some rate. But I guess I just wanted to emphasize the run game again, just because it's what got them here. And like you said, they run everything too. Like I was going back and like just like it's like duo, outside zone, inside zone, tackle trap, split flow, pin pull. Like they do everything at such a high level, and then the backs.
Yeah.
James Cook, man, like I think they're all good.
Right. I
It's really underrated.
I want to take it back to the Josh Allen thing where it just hit me that he never intended on pitching that ball. He just wanted he wanted to remind us that he has grown, because we were watching and we didn't appreciate how he was like, remember me? I could be this guy. I'm not this guy anymore. Remember? Because that was the most outrageous, almost ridiculous play to ever happen. It's like, I remember I used to be the guy that threw go routes to fullbacks when rolling to my left. Now I'm not. I'm smart, Josh. I'm calm, Josh. Relax, Josh. And that was a nice reminder there. He's like, I could be pitching this thing, but you're right about the running backs. I was impressed. And to your point, there weren't like, it was just methodical. And you don't think that you can do that against the Ravens. And frankly, you don't think that you can do that in modern football. It's like you need explosives at some point. Like that's the major criticism of the Eagles. But the Eagles actually do get the explosives from
Yeah.
their running back. But I mean, I guess you consider a run over 10 yards explosive, but it's different. It's still only 10 yards. It's not 20.
I mean, he had one throw over 10 yards the entire
It's
game.
nuts. Like to win
Uh,
that game is, yeah, in that way.
yeah, it's I'm gonna do the championship weekend all of like I do like a matrix where I kind of rank all of the teams, like who was the best offense, whatever, and like run game offensive line. It's gonna be really hard not to put Buffalo. Like the Eagles are more explosive,
Yeah.
but
Buffalo, I
man,
mean, doing that against the Ravens is really impressive, but
it's just that the competition is what made
yeah,
it really like wow to me. Okay, well you have the Ravens as your wolf.
yeah, I mean, it's
Could go in a few different directions here, but
yeah, I mean, we can talk about it all. We'll just go ahead and throw Mark Andrews out there for the Wolf. It's those two plays at the end, and it feels like if the Ravens hadn't won two Super Bowls, it'd feel like they were cursed because they have so many
yeah,
plays like this where they have the Hollywood fumble through the end zone. They have the Lee Evans drop against or in New England. Like, it just feels like, and then through the course of the last couple regular seasons, they just find ways to lose in miraculous ways. But Mark Andrews to have the fumble and the dropped pass on the final two drives. And I think you made this point a little earlier. It's like the Ravens offense, they didn't really get stopped. It's
in the second
like,
half.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the first
Oh,
half
I guess
either.
you mean the turnovers. I
Yeah,
will say the run took a second to get going. Like,
right.
I was surprised by how many run stuffs Buffalo had in the first quarter, but it didn't last long. It's
Right. I mean, the
very,
run
like,
stuff's yeah, but I mean, it wasn't as if they weren't in. They didn't move the ball. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
they didn't force
Lamar's
any
able
punts. Yeah, it
yeah,
was, and the interception wasn't a result of some fancy trick coverage where they stopped them or forced them, and the fumble wasn't like a blown assignment, and
yeah.
we got the sack. It was like, yeah, it was very clear that it was Lamar was doing too much. It was a bad snap on that one, and Henry missed the block and on the interception, and Lamar threw a pretty terrible pass in that situation.
Let me ask you a question, because this was posed to me after the game, and I didn't really know how to answer it. So, self-inflicted errors is what you're
Mhm.
describing. From Mark Andrews is the headliner,
Yeah,
obviously the worst game of his career. Lamar had a couple. Um, and then, there are just a few here and
yeah,
there. But as you said, this has been an issue with this team. This is why they lose. Miles Garrett, I think, was the
hmm
quote, "The Ravens beat themselves," that kind of went viral this
right,
last week. And the question someone posed to me was, do you put any of this on the coach when a team consistently commits these kinds of self-inflicted errors in big games?
yeah. I mean, I think you have to. I don't know how to
It's
make
hard
it.
because I wasn't
Yeah,
watching that being like, John Harbaugh should be doing this or that, or
right,
they're not calling a good game, or it was literally just players making boneheaded mistakes.
right. It's
And it's
different
like,
in every game. It's different in every game, and so like I think so. This game is like, all right, dropping the passes and fumbling the ball is like, yeah, all coaches coach don't fumble. So like that's different. Throwing the interception is like, yeah, Lamar hasn't thrown any interceptions all year, really. Like that's different. And what are you going to tell Lamar to give up on a play? Like the way that he's made magic on so many like
yeah,
blown up plays this year. He
I
had a
know.
bad snap against like so I mean it's kind of similar to the way that I think are you going to give any blame to the quarterback? It's like at the end of the day, like Lamar didn't win, so that's going to be on him. Whether you
Right.
want to explain why he didn't win or not, it doesn't matter. It's on him, and it's like the same thing is probably true for the coach. Is like I can't think of specifically why, but like it happens enough times, somebody got to catch it.
I think uh my where I struggle with the sort of how are people talking about Lamar Jackson or what do you talk about after this game?
Mhm.
Because it was such a like I thought had some of the best plays of the entire
Of
week
course,
and that his entire half, but then made those two crucial errors. Is It's similar to MVP in that it's like semantics, which is to
Mhm.
say, what is the actual conversation we're having here? Are we saying Lamar Jackson is why they lost? I do not agree with that. He played a role in it for sure, but
Mhm.
I hate playoff football when people just say this is the quarterback, although there is one game where I'm gonna put a lot on the quarterback. We'll get to there. But for the most part, like when you go back, even on like terrific playoff runs, I was going back with
Yeah.
someone about the Bengals championship run. Joe Burrow was a significantly worse quarterback than he is now, and
Mhm.
it gets lost to time because people put too much in the quarterback. So no, uh, are we saying, well, this means he's no longer one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? That's ridiculous. It's also obviously has no bearing on MVP because that's a regular season award. The only thing where I think it can give some credence to is, are we putting him in the
Right.
Mahomes tier of like one of the greatest to do it right now? And no, you can't do that because he doesn't have
Yeah.
the accomplishments. So I guess it's
It's
like it
the
feels like everybody's having like 20 different conversations about him at once, and like you have to. I just ask that people like define what's actually being asked or debated, perhaps because a lot of them are pretty stupid.
Yeah, I mean, it's the gift and the curse, essentially. When you're as good as Lamar Jackson, nothing you do matters except for the final result of the season at this point. Like, which he got to this point really quickly. He got to the point where all we really care about is if you can win the Super Bowl or not. He got there really quickly. And that sucks because that's how our conversations are. Because I mean, there's nothing else to say. You want to become better? Like, you can't get better. The only thing that he can do now is win. And whether he's the reason why they win or he's the reason why they lose, none of that really matters. So, like, we can have those conversations. Like, I choose not to engage in them that much because I think it's kind of a weird place to be, especially after a game like that. But I do understand that fundamentally, he's going to be in the top 10 quarterbacks of all time conversation. Where he ranks in that is going to be dependent on how he plays and AFC championship games and Super Bowls, frankly. I mean, frankly, it's just Super Bowls. And so, like, I'm not going to sit here and quibble over whose fault it is in a divisional round because none of that matters for Lamar.
Especially,
And yeah,
yeah, when you look back at all these games, like, for example, Josh Allen was more dazzling in the 13-second game than he
oh yeah,
was in this game, but the Bills won because it's a
right,
team sport, and
right,
it's just
yeah.
silly to over-attribute
The,
everything to quarterbacks.
I do think that there's one thing about the game that is interesting that I wouldn't have anticipated at any point in that game. Did I think that we could possibly walk away from the game in a Josh Allen like way, feeling like whatever playoff issues we thought Lamar had, it doesn't seem like he has them anymore,
Hmm.
even though they lost. Because what the criticism of Lamar wasn't he wasn't good enough, is that he wasn't good enough in the most important moments, right? And he spent the whole second half in clutch moments doing exactly what needed to be done. And all the way down to throwing a very easily catchable pass to tie it and to go into overtime. And so for Ravens fans who wouldn't say it out loud, but in the back of their mind would be thinking like, but the
Mm.
playoffs are here. Lamar is going to get tight. And even Lamar gave voice to the
Yeah.
idea that he gets, I mean, not nervous is where I mean, I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember that terminology, but like he gets a little tight in the playoffs. That feels like that's
No, did
wrong.
not look like that. That's not what
Right.
it
So
looked. Yeah,
like
you're right. Yeah,
that
yeah.
that narrative that I've been hesitant to
Yeah,
accept, but also like the numbers were big enough that it was
yeah.
like, it's kind of a thing, guys. That feels like that at least is gone.
He looked like the same quarterback he's been all year,
Right.
just with 2 terrible interceptions or 2 turnovers rather. I do wanna say something before Bills fans are screaming. I do think if they had tied it, the Bills still would've won. I
Oh
think there was
yeah.
enough time left, and I'm not saying you're not saying that, but,
Right,
like,
right, right, right.
I think that they would've scored a field goal in the remaining time and won the game, but that would've been really cool to see.
Yeah.
I would've loved
Yeah.
that
That would have
instead
been
of ending it the way it did. Mark Andrews' worst game of his career, honestly, given the moment, and it's just you feel
it
for him,
sucks too
honestly. You
because
feel
he's
yeah, he's played
yeah,
such
it
a big
sucks.
role in this team, and
Right. That's
although
and
he drops the football a lot. Like,
right.
I don't
Right.
know
Right, right,
why
right, right,
they
right.
were so shocked on the broadcast, and it was shocking. It literally went
Yeah.
into his stomach, but I was like,
Yeah.
I think that the fumble was worse. I was at NFL Network yesterday, and it was playing
Yeah,
the
the phone was
replay,
tough.
and I looked up. That man, I don't know what happened, like, something got into his brain. What part of him thought
Yeah.
that the way he handled he was like, "Ooh," like
Yeah.
he thought he was Lamar or something with the
Yeah,
ball in
like
his hands. It was,
I was
insane,
thinking like
insane.
you're not Zay, you're not Zay. Go ahead
I
and
know.
but it's
Ugh.
just a terrible because it was such a huge moment in couple of plays that a guy who is likely going to go into the Ravens Ring of Honor,
Yeah.
that every Ravens fan, I mean, assuming that this is his last chance, I don't know, maybe he comes
I
back and
don't think
makes
it
some
will
big
be. I
plays
think he'll come back,
next
yeah.
year. I guess I mean last chance to make a play like that.
Yeah. I would
Yeah.
I
Ravens Ravens
would
fans, when they say Mark Andrews, are gonna think about this
yeah.
game
Hey, how about
before they think
Rashad
about
Bateman,
anything
though?
else.
He really had a great year and finished strong.
Well, he got
Um,
hurt in that final drive too,
yeah,
which
right, yeah,
sucked.
and Anthony Miller getting targets on
Woo!
that final
Big
drive.
time.
Okay, Eagles, speaking of wins not being a quarterback stat, the
Oh,
Eagles triumphed with 65 passing yards over the
mhm.
Rams. You go first. You are on the Eagles, and I will give
Yeah.
the woof for the Rams.
Yeah,
Which
I
one?
think some of these are just obvious picks and that we're using to talk about a broader game because Saquon is the winner for the Eagles. Like the coolest ever. He looked over at Jaylen and said, "Watch this," and then
That was
took.
when they got the close up of that on the
Oh,
replay, I was like, "This
it
is
was it was Joe Burrow levels of cool. It was
so
just
cool."
like to imagine that you have because it's not even like
Calling game for a running
he,
back too.
it's not even like he says he's not that type of guy. Like we don't have a bunch of footage of him saying, "Watch this." Like he said it once. It took it to the crib in a moment where I think it was before that play where Troy and Joe are like, "Hey, it's or not." It wasn't Troy and Joe in that game, was it? Whatever. Whoever was on that game were like, "It's Saquon time." I think literally it might have been Joe. Joe Buck was like, "It's Saquon time, right?" And everyone in the stadium knows who's getting the ball, and he does. He sets it up and makes an incredible play and says, "Watch this!" Like in a divisional playoff game, and it's so fun. It just has to be so fun to feel like you can take it to the crib on any particular play. And like if I were coordinating that offense, I would never throw the ball either. Like why?
This one was I think Chris Collinsworth, right? Because we
Oh
never.
yeah, yeah, it was Chris Collinsworth. You're right because he was talking about how Saquon was setting up those blocks, and Jeff was texting me, so excited about that appreciation of a running back who makes your job as an O lineman easier.
That's the thing that jumps out when you're watching them is just the way him and the offensive line work together and how the combination of them is such a force multiplier. He is the closest thing, like he's almost like a big play receiver in some
Hmm.
just in terms of like the impact on the game. Because it's not just about like, he's
Yeah,
efficient, and they actually weren't super
yeah,
efficient in this game running the football
yeah.
because, the Rams were really determined on stopping him, but that ability to hit those explosives when the block is there, especially on a couple of them, the Rams were putting a lot of guys at the line of scrimmage, and
Hmm.
if you gotta make just, like, one guy mix,
Yeah,
which has
yeah.
happened, very frequently with Saquon, you're able to hit 50, 60 yards the way he does. Next Gen Stats put out a stat after this one. He hit over 20 miles per hour on both of his long touchdown runs. That gives him 13 runs where that's happened this year, over 2 times more than any other running back in the
Mm,
NFL.
mhm.
It's phenomenal. I mean, yeah, I saw some of the usual, like, the Saquon makes less than this receiver, and
Yeah,
the league needs to start paying running backs. The league needed to pay Saquon Barkley. I
yeah,
I really have to dispute the idea that this is like
right.
a running back thing. It's a Saquon thing. Like, there
Yeah.
are some very special backs, and he is one of them.
So there's so much to talk about. I think I'll piggyback on that for 1 second and say that you and I have had these conversations also. And the way that I think about weapons on offense is I think about it more like a basketball team, and that positional value is less important to me. Are you talented enough to be the engine of an offense? Then I would pay you as such. So, like Rob Gronkowski, yeah, I'll pay you to be more than I would. I pay you like an ex receiver because that's what you're worth. The same thing I would say is true for Christian McCaffrey at his peak and Saquon Barkley. I understand like the risk and the injury profile for a running back would make you be a little bit more hesitant. However, creating explosive plays is one of the most important things to whether you win or lose.
Yeah.
The problem with so in that case, then you would logically be like, all right, well, why not try to make an explosive play every down? Because the probability of having successful explosive plays are smaller because those are deeper passes, longer to develop. The idea that you can do the most conservative thing possible and still have the ability to get explosive plays is unexpected explosive plays. Essentially,
Right.
it's huge.
Yeah.
And so like Saquon seemingly does that routinely. And so like I don't want to get into like front office negotiations arguments about how much he should pay or not, but like is he good enough to build an offense around?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and is your offensive line good enough to where you can actually maximize that value? And I would say that it doesn't have to be the Eagles.
right.
This was,
Yeah,
pouring rocket fuel on a fire, right? Or
right.
that's a terrible analogy, but this was
Yeah, you're in LA,
taking,
so
like, an
you're
amazing thing, yeah, and adding
right.
an incredible thing, and of course, the result is awesome. So I think that there has to be a little bit of self-scouting in that regard. It's why, like, one of the big reasons I've objected to over the years, the Seahawks drafting running backs so high is not that I didn't like the backs. It's that the offensive line has never been good enough to make it worth your while.
Right.
I think this offseason, the question when we think about backs, and there aren't really that many free agents, are there any offensive lines to me where it's worth investing in a back? Denver is the one that comes to mind. I was thinking about this, but this was a pretty unique situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously I don't disagree with you, and you're right about the offensive line mattering. But I would say that, and this is where the price matters, because if your offensive line
Yeah.
isn't great, he's still going to make your offensive line better. And so, like, Saquon wasn't a down to down successful back when he was in New York, but he
Yeah.
still created explosive plays. And so, like, if if the back is capable of that, I'm not out
He
here. I'm
didn't
not
create
out
that
here.
many explosive plays, Dominic, that
No,
last year.
oh yeah, I agree. I'm just saying from his career. I'm saying that if
Yeah.
I have a bad offensive line, and I guess this is where the money matters. If I have a bad offensive line, I would still love to have Saquon Barkley. It reminds me a lot of Le'Veon Bell when it was like we used to talk about how good that Steelers offensive line was, but
Yeah.
I remember watching
Well,
Le'Veon Bell set up all the blocks for everybody.
and then the Steelers has something though that the Eagles also have, which is a piece of this, which is like the receiving group, right?
Yeah,
Because they have two unbelievably explosive players on offense. Devontae Smith is fantastic as well, of course, but that's just, I mean, just
yeah,
going back. I think the only thing I would like revisit when we all like the signing. I don't
yeah,
think anybody criticized it, but thinking about if you have a really good offensive line, you have a really good receiver, adding an
yeah,
incredible running back to that is insane because
yeah.
of the way it compromises defenses structurally. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the Eagles rematch with the Commanders. I honestly, we'll be quick here. I had a really hard time coming up with a woof for the Rams because I just feel like this
We do
was like
another winner. Jared Verse, incredible.
Jared versus Saquon. That last run though, who buddy?
But
No, he
Jared
is
Verse,
amazing. He's
he
amazing.
reached 21.6 on
Yeah.
that
No,
run.
he's ama I mean, but that is, why I have trouble with the Rams because this is supposed to be like it just kind of felt like a house money postseason
Yeah.
run. The young defense is awesome. They have players to build around, which was the question of the season. Um, Quarterback, he was struggling a little bit in the snow, and then those last 2 drives reminded people that he can still do things that very few quarterbacks on earth can do. I only wrote, like, there was a fumble in this game. There was some weirdness. A lot of it I thought was snow related. The quarterback fumbled. The Kyron Williams fumbled. I just wrote like if Stafford retires, like that would be my woof. Like, dang, we didn't get another run out of him. But I don't think he's retiring. Jordan Rodriguez had a great recap. Sounds like he's still going to keep playing. He had signed he like restructured his contract headed into the season. I wouldn't be surprised if they, keep do something to make sure he's back next year. That was the only thing I could come with, Dominique,
Yeah.
because I just feel like this was an incredible outcome for them, and they went out like they didn't go out sad.
Yeah. They were overmatched and they were on the final drive that could have won them the game. It's really impressive. Like I mean, uh, the Wolf, if anything, was the turnovers, which I guess it's also like you have to kind of be aggressive when you're the underdog, and sometimes you're gonna have fumbles. I guess the fumble for Williams isn't the same as the fumble for Stafford, who's trying to make plays. There were a couple passes that were dropped, which is like influenced by the weather, but it's also like you're gonna have to do something special. You're gonna have to make some of these catches in these moments. So it's no one specific or no specific unit, but it is like the biggest wolf is a cop out in that they had a chance and they
Yeah,
didn't get it done. It's like
yeah.
you really had a chance on the road in the snow and you couldn't get it done.
Jalen Carter said, "Nah, this one's over." What a player! Oh my god.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's take a quick break. Come back and do the other 2 games. All right, we're back. Another NFC game. Commanders Lions. I wish I'd picked the Commanders. I said it was going to be close, and I
Yeah.
was really on my preview pod with Bill. I was like, I don't know, but I was a wuss in the end. Um, let's start with the Commanders. first here.
Jayden.
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
yeah.
No surprise. It's pretty straightforward podcast. It's the guys who you expect are the winners, and watching that game and seeing how vanilla the offense is, and they just execute it, and they're not trying to. I think we talk a lot about scheming up easy wins, and while some of the wins are easy, they aren't schemed easy wins. It's a result of the defense trying to adjust to slow down what he does, and he doesn't seem to need to take a quarter or a half or a series to figure out what's going on and address it. He figures it out in the course of one series or one play, and that's just like special stuff. It's a nice place to be. Them running the no huddle, I think, helps, but it's a nice place to be with your rookie quarterback that you're just like, all right, just call basic stuff, and he's gonna get it done.
0.76 EPA per dropback versus the blitz. The next closest was Mahomes, who was the only other positive.
Jeez.
That was 0.09. Just going like, so the Lions had to blitz because they couldn't do anything with the 4-man rush, right? So, but the problem was Daniels was an assassin against the blitz, as he has been all year long. But watching what strikes me watching him against the blitz, Domonique, is just the mental side of it. He just has such a unbelievable sense of, one, who to go to, two, how quickly to go there, because it's a nice, like, you know, he's very quick distributor of football, but if there's an opportunity to hang in there and make the big play, this one, there was that gorgeous throw to De'Ami Brown, but there's been a few, he will do that, and then also when to scramble, right? Because there were some moments in this game where he had some pretty big scrambles against the blitz. There was one, I think in the third quarter, where they zeroed him, and he, it was a 14-yard scramble, and I remember thinking, like, God, like he never looks panicked about when he checks down to his feet, a scramble. Like it always looks so intentional. So yeah, I think just the mental. I know we use cliches like poise and maturity and all that, but it really manifests itself on the football field.
Exactly. This is a manifestation of all those cliches. Like when we start using these cliches, just go back to this game and you'll know exactly what we mean. And what also was really impressive was Aaron Glenn tried everything. Like it wasn't just the traditional man coverage that they do. He tried to blitz. He tried multiple zones. He tried everything. And of course, if they had Hutch, a real pass rusher like that, then of course things would have been different. But it felt like Jayden didn't have any negative plays. I'm sure there were some in there, but it just felt like he never had a negative play. And that's hard to do for anybody at any experience level, especially a rookie.
Yeah,
On the road.
I don't blame Glenn. I saw some people saying like, "Oh, you still want to hire Aaron Glenn?" I'm like, yeah, they just literally ran out of humans in this game. And then like I said, the 4-man rush, they couldn't get anything. It was just really, really bad. And to that end, my woof, I went with Jared Goff.
Yeah.
So I want to get your take on this because both coaches received some criticism. Look, the trick play was tough, and I was tough because on one hand you can say, well, they've been doing trick plays all year, and that's true. But like you got to know your humans, and I'm not sure if I'm trusting Jameson Williams at that moment. But just going back and looking at the drives, I mean, this is how it went for the Lions. Scored touchdown. Goff fumbles. He's an empty, and that people took, but it was 3rd and 1. And it's the Lions; they're going to go for it. So he thought, okay, let me see if we can get it. Amon-Ra St. Brown fell, so didn't think it was going to fumble. You can't, as a play caller, say, "How could you dare you drop back ever?" Because the quarterback might. It's just next touchdown, next drive touchdown. Next one, they got stuffed on the run, so it was in 2nd and long. So Goff had to throw, and he pressed the ball to Tim Patrick. That was picked. Next one, touchdown. Next one, again, Goff had an underneath option. He pressed downfield to Jameson Williams. It's an interception on 1st and 10, which they called that play a million times this year. Next drive, touchdown. So it's like, I'm sorry. I'm just looking back at this, and it's just Jared Goff was... Yeah. Jared Goff had a terrible game, and it sucks because he's been awesome this year. But you really saw some of his worst tendencies, particularly under pressure. He went 4 for 14 for 65 yards under pressure. You know, I thought the Washington defensive line was pretty great in this one, to be
Yeah.
honest. But the quarterback just unfortunately, I'm not trying to sound like hypocritical because I said earlier, like I don't want to put everything on the quarterback. But I think of all of the games, this is one where I was like, ooh, this
Yeah.
was the problem.
Yeah. Those turnovers were, I mean, they decided the game essentially because, to your point, it wasn't as if this Washington defense, even though their D line played pretty well, it wasn't as if this Washington defense was shutting them down.
Yeah.
When they had issues, they were obviously like overthrows and like quarterback fumbles. Like there are obvious things that kind of fall on the quarterback, and it's a lot like the Lamar first half. The problem is Jared Goff didn't have another portion of the game where he then turned into the quarterback that we expected him to be or that he's been all season. So yeah, it kind of is on him in these situations if you're overthrowing people by 3-4 yards and it gets intercepted. And yeah, I know he got hit. Luvu blocked him, and some people think that he might have been concussed and that added to it, but none of that matters for the result.
Do you, before we move on, like, obviously Johnson's gone. It sounds like Aaron Glenn's going to be gone as
Yeah.
well. How much does the brain drain the coaching staff concern you for this team?
Yeah, it's concerning. I mean, actually would be more worried about Aaron Glenn, I think. And I guess it depends on how many people stay behind and how good the underlings are to step up.
Right.
But yeah, I'd be more concerned about Aaron Glenn based off the very fickle research of like hard knocks and hearsay. And that Aaron Glenn provides something for that team that emotionally that you don't get from
I've
Ben Johnson.
only heard amazing things about Aaron Glenn from
Right.
anyone who's interacted with him in the league. I think his loss will be mitigated to some degree by just having healthy humans on the field
Yeah,
next year.
that'd be
Obviously,
nice.
Hutchinson being the primary one. But yeah, it's tough. Offensively, there's still such great ingredients there for the next
Mhm.
chef. Offensive line is still what it is. And you can still win with Jared Goff. He actually, you know what? Damn, it actually, I think you and I were like talking about this after they beat the Vikings. And we had this conversation about how it's amazing that the offense still looks this loose
Mhm.
despite the amount of pressure that's on them. Because that was the thing in this one. Obviously, the Commanders put up a zillion points. We knew that the Lions were going to have to
Yeah.
score on just about every drive. The pressure finally hit, it felt like,
Mhm.
in this game, right? Because it obviously hit the quarterback, both literally and, so that's tough. But
Snowballed.
Lions will be fine. I'm going to do a pod with Michael Jr. where I go over through all the playoff teams
Yeah.
and sort of their offseason needs. So actually next week. So stay tuned for that. All right. The final game is Texans Chiefs. I have the winner in this one, Kansas City Chiefs. I was going to do Travis Kelce, who we can talk about, but
Yeah.
I ended up going with the Chiefs defense and Steve Spagnuolo. I
Yeah.
mean, second half, they just took over.
Mhm.
And there's so many things I could highlight in this one. I think Trey McDuffie. Oh my God. What a
Same thing.
player. Which was always going to be a problem with this matchup for Houston because they very much have a number one receiver, and obviously they lost their others, and McDuffie either pressed him or they doubled him on every play.
Mhm.
McDuffie was just like in his hip pocket the whole game. Nico Haas. But the thing I think I want to focus on is just the pressures, going
Mhm.
back and watching them because they're so cool.
Yeah.
Like, so and some of this is on the Texans who struggled with this all year, obviously unblocked pressures, but uh, the Chiefs had 10 different players have unblocked rushes in this one.
Oof.
Ultimately, 8 unblocked pressures. When they blitzed 17 times and got 12 pressures on those blitzes. Their 5-man pressures in particular were just killing them. But like going back and watching all of Stroud's sacks, and there was quite a few in this game, there were 8. Just like every single time they did something different, it was never like, hey, go in with 4. That's just not what every single time there was an overload, a simulated pressure. They zeroed him a couple times in third quarter with great success. There was like, if you saw, a Karlaftis benefited from a lot of the
Tight ends, yeah.
designs. Yeah. But it was Chris Jones being doubled. Frankly, Chris Jones is unbelievable. But just the creativity, I think, of the way they got to the quarterback was just, it was really something to behold.
Yeah, I think Reed had the shirt after the game and Spags we trust on, and I would trust him too. The Spags thing that jumped out to me was just his game management, and it's
Yeah.
something that I don't think about often. Is like, because as a player, like, your mindset is win every play, and not that Spags is not trying to win every play, but I know that when we watch games, oftentimes you'll see the very first third and long, very first opportunity to call your best blitz, you're doing it. Very first third and 6, third and 5, you're like, all right, now see what they can do with this. Which, like, of course, you want to blow them out, win every play. But what I noticed is he didn't do the zero pressures until that pivotal drive late in the
Yeah.
game. And so,
Back to
and then he
back.
did it, and then he did it back to back because they didn't have time to adjust to it. And
Yeah.
it's that
So sad.
speaks to someone who's been in these moments so often.
Yeah.
Is like, you know what? I'm gonna need this. I'm gonna need this at some point. I don't know when it is. Maybe the Texans start to pull away early, and I'm gonna need to pull this out to stop the bleeding. Maybe I'm gonna need to pull this out to put the game away. Maybe we're trailing. We need to get the ball back. Maybe I need to sack them out of field goal range. Like, he doesn't know when he's going to use it, but he has something that he's like, I'm not gonna show it to him until I have to, because I don't want them to adjust to it. And then he's like, all right, right now, I got him right where I want him on second down. Boom, dead. Oh, you guys going to line up again? Do it again on third down. Dead. And then they're out of field goal range and it's fourth down. And
It
I don't
was
know, it's just
interesting.
masterful.
I almost feel like Travis Kelce, who was unbelievable in this game, is Andy Reid's kind of chess piece, and then Chris
Mm-hmm.
Jones is Steve Spagnuolo. It's funny because they're both getting up in the years. They're both still so unbelievably dominant, but the way he deploys him in those moments. I mean, also just like on all these sacks, going back, like Chris Jones is doubled on almost all of them, or he is the one getting in. Like, it's just the offensive line. I mean, Houston's obviously a very bad offensive line, but just generally using him to dictate matchups for other people is such a weapon for Steve Spagnuolo and his Chiefs defense. So they're excellent, man. They're. It's going to be very fascinating to watch this rematch against Buffalo because, yeah, I mean, it'll be a lot harder than Houston, who is the Woof. Died the way they lived with 10 pass rushers coming unblocked at CJ Stroud. Is that where you want to start, or is there anything
Yeah.
else that jumped out
I
to you?
mean, I guess we can. I had officially as my wolf the refs, but I feel like we should not spend too much time on the ref conversation.
You could address it because I haven't talked about it at all.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I pushed away from it some is because the Texans also talked about it, which, like, y'all should shut up about it, honestly. Like,
That was surprising to me. I
yeah,
was surprised D'Amico Ryan. I mean, I guess it was
yeah,
emotion, but he's
yeah,
so usually
yeah.
within himself, and
He's
I
an
was,
old school coach by the book. It's like you don't
yeah.
expect him to do this blaming situation on the rest. But yeah, those calls were bad, and also Mahomes doing the floppy stuff is really particularly unlikable.
It's not
Um,
great. Yeah.
yeah, but I am not one who believes that it was like a deciding factor in the game. Like, the Texans didn't do enough to win, and the Chiefs made the plays that they needed to make. But I do think it's the protection, which includes Stroud, like the combination of their inability to protect
Yeah.
Stroud and
It's
Stroud's inability to respond to the pressure effectively is particularly wolfy because it's a season long thing. It's like, even teams with bad offensive lines like recognize that there's something that we should do about this, and Stroud is just often surprised
yeah, yeah. I
by
mean,
the pressure.
it's a good point because I don't think it's just on the offensive line. I think
Right.
Stroud bears some responsibility. The scheme bears Bobby Slowick bears some responsibility. I mean, I talked about all the unblocked pressures the Chiefs got in this one. He faced 52 this year, which is the second most in the NFL behind Caleb Williams, who's a rookie. Like, it's just rough and unacceptable. So it's obviously got to be. think Bobby Slowick is keeping his job, by the way. I don't know. There's some interesting language coming out of there, but that has to be a big priority for them. One thing about the refs, I almost wonder if part of the reasons D'Amico was so upset by it was the roughing call on Anderson, which was total, I think. He drew up a really good pressure in that moment. They ran a little game, and I was surprised they didn't do it more often, by the way. And I feel like I didn't know if they showed him on the sideline, but I was like, ooh, I bet that had to piss him off a little bit, just coming on the defense like that. It's interesting with the I mean, I haven't done the research on the penalties, and I hope Bill Barnwell did a while ago, and everybody got mad at him because he was like, Chiefs don't actually benefit that much from, during the regular season. You would think, though, that the league would be sensitive to it and almost like there'd be like a mandate to not call some of these. I don't know. I have no
Yeah.
idea. I
No, I
don't
mean,
believe there's a conspiracy or anything like that, but like
I never think it would be a mandate as much as the refs would be conscious
conscious,
of it,
yeah.
right? And like they know what the conversation is going to be. But I also recognize that I remember if it was a couple years ago, maybe it's like Patrick Mahomes got hit and all of us held our breath. It had to be 3 years ago because it was like the Chiefs' offense was still explosive and fun. And this is my meager defense for the refs: is I'd rather, if you're gonna err, I'd rather you err on the side of protecting our great quarterbacks than not, which I know is probably unpopular and undefensive minded of me, but
Ravens fans are screaming right now because Lamar got
yeah, no,
flattened.
yeah, Lamar had that one. They had that pass interference call
Yeah,
that I thought was a bad call. So like, yeah, I get it. But to your point, Lamar got tackled out of bounds. Like, yeah, we should protect the best quarterbacks. What you
yeah.
don't want to end up with is them getting hurt because which, yeah, they took it a little too far. But I guess I'm saying I'd rather them take it far further in that direction than them toe the line in the other direction.
Yeah, I hear you. Some of the roughness calls are the ones that I
Yeah,
think tend to, because some of them are just, I mean, those tend to be the ones that are the most vividly
yeah.
wrong and frustrating. And I don't think it's why that the Chiefs won. I mean, I
Mhm.
literally spent like 15 minutes just going through every single pressure. So yeah, it's tough. All right. Well, I'm sure someone else, maybe Bill, will do another look at all the actual numbers on this, because I do think it is kind of interesting. And also, by the way, going back to our beginning, about when we were talking about the Ravens and whether or not Harbaugh bears some responsibility for the self-inflicted errors, the Chiefs don't make a lot of those. Now, again, someone's saying, "Would you want Taylor is offsides or is
Yeah.
ball starting at every play?" So yeah, that's fair too. So, okay, we will be back next week to do a recap of the championship pods.
Ooh.
The championship games rather, which is always fun. But in the meantime, you guys should check out the Domonique Foxworth show wherever you get your podcasts. I will be on to preview those games probably on Thursday. Yeah, looking forward to it.